Hey everyone, welcome to my newest video. Today I will be doing something completely different than I have been doing over the past few weeks, and that's because I kind of felt like maybe doing, pinups all the time would be a little bit boring or maybe less educational for you guys. And in order to do something, refreshing, I thought it would be cool to do a real tutorial actually this time where I'm explaining what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how you can use it when you are drawing comics. And I think I will be doing this over some time to see what you guys think. And it's going to be a how to draw comics tutorial, and the tutorial will be about the establishing shot. The establishing shot, as you may know, is the introduction to a into visual storytelling, and it's being used by obviously by comic book artists, by storyboard artists and movie makers. And I want to show you guys one version on how to do it. I may do some more videos on the topic of establishing shots, but I wanted to start with something easy digestible and or easily digestible, and then see how you guys react to it and how you like it, and maybe you guys will be able to give me some feedback on what you think, or if you want to see more of this kind of stuff, or if you prefer the old stuff. And that's up to you guys. If you like what you see, as always, please subscribe to my channel, like, comment, and obviously share my videos. If you want to see more of my artwork, please follow me on Instagram. It's at Sedat Özgen. And if you want to follow me on Facebook, it's at Sedat Özgen Art. Thank you very much, and now off to the video.
All right, so the first step for the establishing shot will be that I am drawing the really rough shapes in form of a thumbnail into the panel. And the interesting or the important thing here is to get down the visual idea and to see if the composition works. And the idea for this panel is going to be a castle which is surrounded by three dragons that are flying over the castle. And as you will later on see, I am adding the dragons and later on a few obelisks in there in order to have a more dynamic element to the static castle, because the castle obviously is a um, building, and buildings usually don't get very dynamic unless you use a very dynamic perspective. But in this panel, I try to use a 2-point perspective and get over the fact that the castle is rather static by adding those dragons and the obelisks, because they provide a certain degree of dynamics to the drawing. And what I'm doing now is that I am starting with the perspective grid, and I'm speeding up the video a little bit here because there is not much to say about adding those lines for the perspective grid, other than that there's a 2-point perspective here, and it has two vanishing points, and I added 2 or 4 more vanishing points for some of the other parts of the castle in order to make the castle a little bit more dynamic and look a little bit more realistic, and as if it's taking up actual space in the drawing, and to make it more three-dimensional. And yeah, and I hope that it works. I think it does, but we'll find out later about that. And yeah, and I am using different colors here in order to get the to make sure that I won't be confusing the lines for the other vanishing points. I'm using red and a little bit darker blue in order to do that. And now I'm starting to flesh out the pencil drawing of the dragons, and I'm adding just the most necessary amount of details in there in order to get it right. And as you can see, the dragons do have a more, you know, kind of fluid shape, and they look like snakes in the sky. And by doing that, I am, adding a certain degree of uh, um, dynamic and movement and vividness to the drawing, because as I mentioned before, the castle, despite the fact that I've used several vanishing points for some of the buildings, still looks kind of static even later on, and therefore I try to compensate that by using those, snake-like shapes for the dragons. And now I am working on the obelisks. And the important thing for an establishing shot is to make sure um, that you communicate to the reader or the watcher, whatever it is you're doing, whether it's storytelling, storyboards, or comics, where we are in terms of environment, or in what country we are. For example, if this were something like Game of Thrones, we'd see, hey, this is, you know, this and that castle, which would be probably more notable. And by doing that, we help the reader or the viewer understand that there has been a change in the scenario, or it can help in terms of storytelling when you are trying to, when you're sometimes, let's say, somebody's getting killed in the story, but we don't want to show the murder, then we can just zoom out of the castle, and then just have, something like a sound effect or something that says and we know, okay, somebody just got killed, but we don't see how that person got killed, or maybe we don't see the murderer, and we just know that something horrible happened, but without showing it. And by pulling it out, we establish the fact that it happened in this castle. And yeah, now I have flashed out the pencil drawing as much as necessary in the drawing, and I am just adding a little bit of gray tones. But before I do that, I am moving one of those dragons because I wanted to convey a little bit more depth into the drawing, and I thought it would be much better if I have the dragon behind the castle. And yeah, and now I am starting to ink the whole piece, and um, I am going with a rather simple approach of inking here, because I wanted to keep the video as short as possible. And if this were an actual comic page that I would draw, I would probably spend a few hours doing the whole thing. But since this is just a video that should help you to understand what I am doing, I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, and therefore I'm going with a more open style in this regard, which is a little bit cleaner and everything. And just trying to show the shapes of the dragons and a few details here and there, but I'm not trying to go for a very realistic kind of style. And yeah, and as you can see, that there is also going to be, or you're going to see that I'm also playing a little bit with the line weight here, because for example, in this scene or in this part, I am just using the silhouette of the third dragon's tail, which allows me to not have to draw the dragon, but we know that there is a third one flying around. And since the obelisks are in the front of the drawing, I am adding a few more details into the stones, or adding more texture to them. And I am also adding way more blacks into the obelisks, because that will allow me to show you that the obelisks are closer to the viewer while the castle is further away. And yeah, I think it's coming along nicely. And the idea of the establishing shot is to create a picture or a frame that you can use to introduce the reader to the story. You can introduce the viewer to the story without even knowing anything about this drawing or this story. The reader will, right away understand, oh, this is probably a fantasy story, and there are dragons in it, and there are castles in it, and the environment looks a little bit different than our environment, because it has these triangled sort of looking obelisks, which could also be, maybe they are like dragon bones that are growing out of the earth or something like that. Something totally crazy, but we know it's definitely not Earth, it's not Scotland, it's not England or any other place where you would have, such a castle, and it's a fantasy world. And by adding the if you look into or onto the picture, you see that there is a route heading towards the castle. I am basically directing your eyes towards the castle, despite the fact that there are 3 dragons flying around in the picture and we have all these obelisks. The route is basically what is guiding you towards the castle, and that's the idea behind it. And we want to we want to have cool stuff in there, but we want to still be able to focus on the most necessary or most important information in the drawing. So I could have basically just gone with the castle, shown it, and without having the dragons and without putting so much emphasis on, for example, the obelisks, because they are just elements in order to make the whole thing more realistic and also a little bit more dynamic, since the obelisks, for example, are not growing straight out of the ground, but they are growing like like crooked teeth or something like that. And yeah, and now I am working on the castle, and I am trying to make this look a little bit like those English castles, but I am also adding a little bit of a, if you look at the tower in the middle, it looks like a tower from a church, and it has this, triangled shape on top of it. And, to my shame, I have to admit that I didn't have the time to research for, some actual castles, because that's usually something you should do. But, I wanted to make this. I wanted to make this video, and I wanted to do something new, and I tried my best. And by this was the only way, because I am currently really under a lot of stress in terms of time management. So I wanted to make sure that I could deliver something new to you guys, and I truly hope that you're already enjoying this, because I think these tutorials may be a little bit more interesting to you than the pinups that I was doing, because it always felt a little bit like repetition, because at some point it may get boring to look at the 20th pinup video. So I decided that I would go for a how to draw comics and show you guys how I approach certain things. And yeah, and I am now adding details to the castle in the background. I'm adding some very solid blacks into the drawing in order to add this certain amount of focus in there, because you want to make sure that the castle in the background doesn't just disappear in in the presence of the dragons and the obelisks. And I think it's working quite nicely. As I mentioned before, I may should have used some reference here, but this is my first video of this series, and maybe I will have maybe I will figure out a way to do it better next time. So yeah, and as you can see, I am adding more and more details to the castle to make it look more realistic. realistic and believable. It looks a little bit weathered down, and we can see a few of the windows or some of those, bridges that are in the background. And now I'm starting to ink the last dragon. I wanted to keep this dragon for the end of the video because I wasn't sure how the line weight would or should work in combination with the tower in front of him, because you want to make sure that we can still we still have this scale to show that there's a really big dragon flying around the castle. But you got to make sure that the line weight of the dragon isn't more present or more emphasized than the castle in front of him. And now I'm starting to add some gray tones here and there, and I'm making that in order to make the whole thing pop out a little bit more, because I want to make sure that despite the fact that I don't have that much time to add a ton of details, I want to make sure that it's still kind of cool looking. And and I think it's coming along nicely, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing here, and it's starting to come together. And I probably could have added some clouds into the background, and then maybe even more hills or something like that into the background. But I wanted to make sure that this picture isn't overloaded and that you guys get the idea of what's going on here. And now I am obviously adding more gray tones to the whole drawing. I am just filling this area and with a light gray, and then for the obelisks I'm using a somewhat darker gray. This also allows for a nice framing, because these obelisks are surrounding the castle, just like the dragons, which also have a little bit more gray on them. And that's while the castle is basically mostly white, so it helps me to basically frame the castle and make sure that you guys will be focused on the castle. Thank you for tuning in. If you guys like what you saw, please subscribe to my channel. Come to my Instagram. My Instagram is @sedatözgen. My Facebook is @sedatözgenart. See you next week.